We want to be intentional about the things we say yes to, the things that we put on our schedule and on our task list. Because otherwise, we're just going to end up in that same loop of hyper functioning, trying to get all this stuff done. And then we're going to be exhausted and crash, and we're still not enjoying life. I will say that when you're building a business, that first year or two, maybe that you are maybe pushing and pushing a little more than you will be eventually. But there's balance there. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I've got another special episode. I think I say all of my episodes are special episodes. Today, I really want to talk about a group of ADHD women that I think works their butts off and is exhausted. And I want to talk about that. And so we're going to dig right into hyper functioning ADHD women. So if this is you, be sure to keep listening. So you may know immediately if I say hyperfunctioning exactly what I mean and what this looks like. And I know from personal experience, because this is how I lived the first half or more of my life, was spending all of our time and energy on functioning. We have elaborate systems. We have all this extra stuff that we do to function. And we often are high performers and we get a lot done, right? So much so that a lot of people probably don't even see that we have ADHD and maybe don't even believe us when we tell them that we think we do, right? We might not even believe ourselves that we have ADHD or see it, right? Like maybe you've masked through high achievement, like anyone else, honors classes, National Honor Society, all that kind of stuff. Maybe you have masked through people pleasing, like saying yes to everybody. And I've got some thoughts on how that shows up. Maybe you've masked through perfectionism, right? Because if you're always trying to make everything be perfect, then no one knows that you have ADHD, right? And the thing about this that I want to say is most of the time when we have masked our ADHD in this way, we didn't even know we had ADHD. I know for me and a lot of the women I work with, the deal is we've seen how other people are treated negatively for things that might be how we show up in the world if we didn't mask our ADHD, right? Like I remember being in elementary school and seeing, I don't want to say their last names, but Peter and Stacy, they're guys. So, they're probably not listening, but I remember them getting in all kinds of trouble. And one clearly had inattentive type ADHD and the other one hyperactive type with some trauma. I'm pretty sure it was like watching them get punished. And I went to Catholic school for better or for worse, and it was scary to get in trouble. Like it did not go well for people when they got in trouble in Catholic school back in the late 70s, early 80s when I was there. And so I learned to mask and push down my ADHD symptoms. And you may have done this for your own reasons as well. And I want to name that not everyone's able to do this. And so if you weren't able to do it, that doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're less than. It just means that you had different life circumstances. My mom was a super loving, effective parent, and my dad was loving in the way that he can be. And so having that as well as lots of community, even though that community was shame ridden, at the same time, I knew that people cared about me, right? So maybe that was what gave me the wherewithal to even be able to mask in the first place. Whereas had I been in a traumatic home environment, I don't know if I could have. However, I will say some of my clients who grew up with complex trauma are actually really good maskers because they're dissociative, right? Or like they push at school because they have a place where they want to be valued and thrive, right? So I don't know that there's clear lines of what makes someone able to do this or not. But what I see in many of the women I work with and in myself is for whatever reason, we learn to mask by hyper functioning. by putting in extra time, way more than our peers, to be able to get our stuff done. I was in high school and I remember kind of bragging about like I have 5 hours of homework a night because I'm in all honors classes. But it never occurred to me that other people in those honors classes did not have 5 hours of homework a night, right? It didn't occur to me until maybe within the last couple of years that I was like, oh, that probably took me 5 hours because I have ADHD, didn't know it, and would have to reread pages and history. Oh, good grief. I would fall asleep trying to read history. I don't even know that I ever finished reading my history books and just studied my butt off from the notes to be able to do well enough. But I think a lot of us, we found our way to still achieve. We did way more than our peers. And what this looks like now in adulthood, if you're still doing it or if you were doing it, is spending almost all of your free time outside of work. Or if you don't still have a full-time or part-time job and you're a full-time entrepreneur, it might mean that almost all of your time is going to just functioning and getting stuff done, and that you have very little time or energy to do the things that you love the most, right? Because either your schedule is full with catching up and getting shit done and all that, or you've crashed and you don't have the energy for anything. Like the idea of going and seeing a friend feels just like so overwhelming. You're just like, I can't even, right? Sounding familiar? I don't know. I wish I could see head nods. I suspect I'm not alone in this. And so this hyper functioning has helped us in so many ways. And we come by it honestly, right? Like we're trying to stay out of trouble. And before I talk about some of the problems with it, I want to talk about a couple other ways that this shows up. One of it is in perfectionism, right? Like not only are we hyper functioning, but everything we're trying to make it perfect. We want the perfect A, we want the perfect paper, all that stuff. And that is a way that we try to mask our ADHD, because then no one catches on that like deep down we're defective, right? I know like on some level I knew something was wrong, and it wasn't that something was wrong, it was something was different and not yet welcome in society. So maybe it's still a stretch to say ADHD is welcome in society, but I think more and more of us are realizing it's just a difference in ability versus a bad thing, right? It's only a struggle because our society isn't built for our ADHD brains. If you're like, ADHD does suck, and it's like, well, would ADHD suck as much if the world was different? Not to get all meta and esoteric, but in some ways, I don't think ADHD itself is the problem, but that's a whole nother tangent. But perfectionism is our way to try and cover this up so that we're still seen as competent by everybody else. And also that we can start to believe in ourselves and have some sense of self-worth. What I'll tell you is it doesn't work. As a recovering perfectionist, no matter how perfectionistic I was, all I was tired. I was never mistake free. Yeah, I got lots of accolades and masked through high achievement, and that's great. And mostly I was just tired, right? And burned out, especially as I got post-college into my actuarial years. So before we unpack that, as well as the hyperfunctioning, another way that a lot of us hyperfunctioning ADHDers mask is through people pleasing. And again, I think this is a subconscious pattern we develop because we become yes people. Like, yeah, I can do that for you. Of course I can do that for you. Because, we found a way to hyperfunction. So then we just keep taking on more stuff. I think, at least for me and what I witness in others in my experience, is that this seems to be a subconscious understanding, or say a part of us that seems to get that if we are helping people this much, I mean, first of all, we're just natural helpers. We tend to be pretty sensitive people. But also, I think on some level, a part of us understands that if we're helping people like this, people will be able to have grace for us when maybe our ADHD challenges show up more, like when we break shit, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I break shit, like not intentionally. Like I just run into something or I'm not paying attention, and maybe someone gives me a little more grace, or maybe I am running late, but because I've helped them out so much, they're a little more patient around that, right? Not that we do it intentionally in a manipulative way, but I think on some subconscious level, there's a part of us that understands that people pleasing can be a way that we mask our ADHD, or at least I don't want to say get away with it like it's this bad thing, but kinda, right? Like get away with it in our society that doesn't accept it. So I don't know. I don't like how that sounds coming out of my mouth, but it's almost kind of like what it feels like, even though it shouldn't be that way. I want to unpack these different pieces. And like I said, we come by it honestly. We're just trying to function. We're just trying to get by with our ADHD. And in this society that is just not designed for our brains. And so we did what we knew how to do as young kiddos and young adults to try and figure out, like, okay, if I do this, I can function. And I'm not going to say this was like the worst thing I ever did. I don't know that I could have gotten through graduate school with graduate school being the way it is. I don't know that I could have gotten through my math degree with how that was had I not learned how to hyperfunction. At the same time, the problem with hyperfunctioning, perfectionism, and people pleasing is that we start to lose touch with ourself. We start to lose touch with who we really are, with our gifts. We lose touch with the positive sides of ADHD, which I'm not trying to put like a rosy picture on ADHD, but I think we do have some unique gifts. Our ability to be like super passionate and just focused on something that we love and that we feel strongly about. That is something that not a lot of people have. We tend to be highly energetic and enthusiastic, right? And highly creative. But what I found is when I was so busy hyper functioning just to get by in society, essentially masking my ADHD, I lost touch with my creativity. I was starting to lose passion. And quite frankly, I developed an anxiety disorder and depression because I didn't have time to do the things I loved. And so I started to feel depressed and exhausted and burned out, but also anxious because it felt like I was juggling all these balls and there was no way I could keep them all going much longer, right? Like keep the charade of ADHD that I didn't know was ADHD going, right? And I think that's fair. I think a lot of us experience that, right? And someday, maybe society will embrace our neurodivergent brains as just a difference in ability. And this won't be something that young people have figured out as a way to function. Or maybe I'm seeing a lot of these Gen Zers and they're just like, screw it, I got ADHD and this is just how I am. Here I come, society. I'm like all for it. Like, go Gen Z, right? Like, let's bring the change. Let's be the change. And if you are someone who is hyper functioning, you likely have anxiety if you're still doing it, or you get burned out, or you're in this awful cycle of push, push, and then crash. And it's just no way to live because there's just, it steals your joy, right? It's like, at what point does it feel like you're just on this hamster wheel? I think it's why a lot of women and people in general with ADHD tend towards entrepreneurship. It's like a super high percentage of entrepreneurs who have ADHD. I can't even remember what it is. It probably doesn't matter, but it's just super high. And the thing about that is of course we do. We want the freedom to work in a way that works for our brain instead of having to, hack our way through living the neurotypical way. We want the freedom to design our own schedule in a way that works for our energy levels and how they fluctuate uniquely to us throughout the day and with what tasks we have. We even want to decide the work we want to do and how we want to do it. I think neurotypical people want that too. But for us, it's a matter of being effective and productive versus not. For them, I think it's just more of like, oh, it's more enjoyable to do it this way. I'm not sure. I'm not neurotypical. We'd have to ask. But for us, it's a matter of can we get shit done consistently over a long period of time without honoring our own work needs, our own work styles, our own energy levels, our own way that we do time and the way that we are in different moon cycles and where the sun is in the sky, right? Because as people with ADHD, we're highly sensitive. And so we feel the energy of the world, and we need to honor that and work with it and work with our ADHD. So I think that's why a lot of us tend towards entrepreneurship. So here's the deal. One of the ways that we start to overcome this pattern of hyperfunctioning is by creating a business that works for us. If we don't like working 8 to 5, then don't work 8 to 5 anymore, for goodness sakes. If you're someone who does really good work in the morning from like, I don't know, like 5 to 9, and then you do really good work at night from 7 to 10, that could be your schedule. For me personally, I do really good work between 10 and about 6 o'clock at night, sometimes as late as 7. It depends on what I'm doing and on the day. But outside of that window, it is rough. It is very rough. I can get myself to do stuff outside of that window, but it takes me twice as long, and usually it's lower quality work. So figuring out when you can work and how you can work is essential to stepping out of that hyper functioning pattern, because then you're going to be more efficient. So you won't need to hyper function anymore, right? Also, being an entrepreneur means that you get to delegate things. And you might be like, but Jen, I'm just starting a business. How can I delegate things? I have a business with one employee, and it's me. And I'm actually not an employee. I'm the CEO, which is fair, right? And I will tell you that with ADHD, there are some things we just have to hire out for. And it's not a luxury. Like, for real, not a luxury. Just like, I know someone who's got scoliosis, and for him, getting a massage, preferably every week, but at least every 2 weeks, is not a luxury. It is a necessity if he wants his back to not hurt and to be able to function in his job, right? With ADHD, for us to be able to function, we need things like assistance. We need apps that help us, right? I'm not suggesting you go spend like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, because when we're first starting out in business, we do want to keep our expenses low. But on the other hand, we can be really strategic about what things we know we're just not going to do well. So for me, the first thing I hired an assistant for is to edit my podcast and create content that goes with it. Because I could edit my podcast onto script. It wasn't that hard. It didn't take that long, though it did drain my energy. Like, I'm perfectly capable, but it took time and energy that I would rather spend somewhere else, and that would be more productive for me to spend somewhere, because I'm the only one that can do some of these other tasks. But I was never able to get myself to, and I had a different podcast for like, I don't know, like a year, and couldn't get myself to create content from it. And believe me, I tried. I am really good at getting myself to do stuff, but that was just not something I could do. So that is the first thing I hired out for, is someone to create reels and audiograms and content that goes on my social media platforms to be able to get my podcast out into the world. They do a great job. I'm super grateful. And I chose to use a virtual assistant. There is a lower cost to that, because the virtual assistant I work with is in the Philippines. And so even though I'm paying them well over like multiple times their minimum wage, to me, the cost is lower than it would be to hire someone who's in the States. And that doesn't mean that I don't value workers in the States. And I do want to help local people. And also, when we're starting a business, we need to be able to actually survive our business, right? Like, we need our business to survive. We need to be able to get it off the ground. And so virtual assistants are a great way to start to delegate some of those tasks, right? And so being able to delegate is one way out of the hyperfunctioning, right? Making your own schedule is another way out of the hyperfunctioning. Looking at the things that you think you need to do and crossing stuff off that list is another way to step out of hyperfunctioning, because there's all kinds of things we get into our head that we need to do, and most of it we just don't. Like, I am going to be opening up some more seats in my program soon here, and I was like, oh, I should totally create a sales page. I'm going to do this. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm only like opening up like 5 seats at most. So why would I create a sales page to try and get 5 people into my program? Like, to invite 5 people into my program? Like, I'm going to be doing other methods of inviting them in. And so why would I put in several hours creating a sales page? So that gets crossed off the list. And by the way, probably saved me about like, I don't know, 4 to 10 hours, depending, right? I tend to be pretty nitpicky about copy. So I do all my own copywriting. So those types of things tend to take me longer. So if I can cross something like that off my list, it's like, well, duh, why wouldn't I? Yeah. So those are just some of the ways we can start to step out of this hyper functioning. And some of it, I will say, another piece of it that's big is realigning our expectations. I was working with people in my program on this today, is building a business takes more than just a couple of months. So having all this pressure to do all this stuff right now, it's just going to stress out your brain and dysregulate your nervous system, which is going to make it harder for you to focus. And so instead of looking at all the tasks you have to do, maybe clump them together and just only look at like, okay, this is the stuff that I want to get done this week. And then even pare it down more. This is what I want to get done today. So that you're not overwhelming yourself with all the tasks, but also creating realistic expectations for yourself about what your business is going to look like, how long it's going to take to set it up. If you are still working full time and you just have an idea of what you want to do, I'd be surprised if you have a business to replace your full-time income in just a few months. Like that would shock me. I would expect that to take at least a year. And that's if you're super dedicated. I mean, it all depends on how hard you work, right? If you work full-time still and you have kids and you're going to develop this business on the side, that's going to take you more than a year. Not because you're not good or the service you have isn't important, but because you're just not going to have the same amount of time to dedicate to being able to do that. So these are just some things to think about when we're shifting out of hyperfunctioning. We want to set our expectations. We want to be intentional about the things we say yes to, the things that we put on our schedule and on our task list. Because otherwise, we're just going to end up in that same loop of hyper functioning, trying to get all this stuff done. And then we're going to be exhausted and crash, and we're still not enjoying life. I will say that when you're building a business, that first year or two, maybe that you are maybe pushing and pushing a little more than you will be eventually. But there's balance there, right? It's really important that your brain gets a break and that you get to do things that you enjoy and love. Otherwise, what's the point, right? You're going to work for yourself so you can enjoy life. So finding that balance. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about perfectionism. It's a big topic. A lot of us ADHDers are perfectionists, especially us that fall into this hyperfunctioning category. And we come by it super honestly. Like we do. We don't want to get in any more trouble. I mean, remember several recent episodes, I shared that estimate of like we receive by age 10, ADHDers receive 20,000 more corrective or critical comments than other people without ADHD do, right? And that was a good estimate made by a pediatric psychiatrist who I believe, can't remember if it's Stanford, Yale, or Harvard, but it's a Ivy League school. And it was based on the idea that we get 3 more corrective or critical comments every hour from our teachers, which is a pretty conservative estimate, I think. So we come by this effort at being a perfectionist, honestly, because we're trying to avoid that criticism. But to what end? I really feel like the cure to perfectionism is getting comfortable with mistakes. And in fact, even shifting your mindset that they're not mistakes. That when things maybe don't go the way we planned them to go or the way we intended them to go, it's not that we messed up. It's not that we are messed up. It's that something didn't go as we intended. And it's like, all right, what do I learn from this? Because that didn't work. Right? If you want to call them mistakes, are really learning opportunities. It's like, all right, well, what can I learn from that? And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you are an entrepreneur or you're planning on stepping out into business, being comfortable with things not going the way you intend is like one of the top skills you're going to need. You need a lot of skills, but the experimenter mindset is essential to entrepreneurship because you're branching out and you're doing something new that no one else has done before in your own way. So there is a lot of like, hey, I'm going to test this out and see how it goes. And well, that didn't go well. And so you try again. And if you're going to be a perfectionist about it, I got to tell you, you're going to have a very hard time. You're going to have a hard time even getting started. In fact, that's one thing I see in ADHD women is this perfectionistic attitude that they get so overwhelmed about the end result having to be perfect that they can't even start. And so it's like, what if you let go of all that and you just take a step and you're like, I'm just going to like do something. I'm going to do anything. It might not even be the final project or product. I'm going to let you in on a secret. This is my second take of this podcast. Because after I recorded the first one, I wrote the email and I was like, oh, I should have talked about this and I should have talked about that. And so I'm like, all right, well, not my first choice. And I could have put the other podcast out, but I missed some really important points that I wanted to share. And so I'm re-recording it. That wasn't my first choice of how to spend an extra half hour today. And it's just what I'm deciding to do, not because I need it to be perfect, but because I want it to be informative and helpful. Right. But I'm not berating myself. I'm like, all right, well, that just didn't work. I'm going to try again. Yeah. So part of stepping out of perfectionism is getting comfortable with mistakes. And instead of seeing them as these awful things, just recognizing that it's just something you tried that didn't go the way you intended and you're going to learn from it. Right. It doesn't have to be this catastrophic thing that means you're defective. And I've talked about this before, but it's all about adopting the growth mindset, right? Which is what I just explained versus the fixed mindset, whereas a mistake means you don't have it. Because the fixed mindset believes you have it or you don't. And if you make a mistake, it means you don't have it, right? Go and watch John McEnroe in the 80s play tennis. For those of you who are if you're under 40, you probably don't remember John McEnroe, especially if your parents never had tennis on. But if you're a Gen Xer or older, you definitely know who John McEnroe is. But he would go ballistic when he made a mistake because he couldn't admit it was a mistake. He would blame the racket. He would blame the court. He would blame I don't know if you call him a ref or an ump, but whatever, the person, the officiant, not officiant, the officiate. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But whatever it is, he would blame them. He'd blame the wind or the crowd or whatever because he couldn't accept that he made a mistake because making a mistake meant that he didn't have it. Right? That is the bad side of perfectionism. Whereas if instead, since he's studied the growth versus fixed mindset, he's admitted, gosh, if I had that growth mindset, if I'd been able to see those opportunities for learning and improving my game, I would have been even better of a professional tennis player than I was. So as you are noticing your perfectionistic tendencies, if you have them, start to think about shifting to this growth mindset. The way that I did it, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but what I would do is I'd go, whoops-a-daisies, that's not how I wanted that to happen. Or, oh dear, that wasn't my first choice of what I wanted to do there. Right? Instead of berating myself, that was what I started to do. I mean, probably first what I did was notice the times when I was berating myself and go, well, that's not helpful. And then eventually switch to the whoops-a-daisies, right? And you might be like, well, that's cavalier. I think cavalier is the word I want there. Yeah, well, I think you know what I mean. But I don't know. What else am I going to do? Shame myself for making a mistake? Like I'm going to shame myself because I might have misused the word cavalier. I don't really care. You know what I mean? Right? So my point is to start to practice shifting away from this perfectionism. All right. Last but not least, people pleasing. Ah, yes, people pleasing. We come by it honestly, as you've heard me say. And here's the deal. It doesn't work. As a recovering people pleaser, what you end up doing is attracting people who want things from you versus true friends and true colleagues when you're a people pleaser. You attract takers, not people who are interested in mutual support and a balance between give and take. How do I know this? Well, I've experienced it personally. I have a long list of people that I could, I'm not going to name any names here. They come by their stuff honestly too, no judgment. But having been a people pleaser and always saying yes and helping, yes, I did want to help, but there were other deeper things going on that I needed to take a look at so that I could let go of that tendency. And when I let go of that tendency, there were people who did exit my life, but they were people who were using me for what I was doing for them. Right? They were people, they didn't like my new boundaries, but that was because they were benefiting from my lack of boundaries. They were benefiting from my people pleasing. And when I actually started to show up authentically in a relationship, those people disappeared. And so part of letting go of people pleasing is making peace with, you may quote unquote lose some people in your life, but I would actually question if they were really in your life in the first place or if they're just there for the perks. Just something to think about. It doesn't mean it won't be painful. It doesn't mean it won't be hard. But as you start to step away from people pleasing, what you'll notice is your circle will get smaller before it gets bigger again. But then as you show up authentically and you set boundaries and you let people see your awesome ADHD-ness, including your less than awesome ADHD-ness, you will find true connection, true belonging. There is a piece of like, okay, I might not have some of the people in my life that I had before, but also you will shift into having people that maybe are a better fit for what you're really looking for. I'm not saying it's not hard, but it's definitely work we need to do. And a big piece of this is boundary work, which is such a big, huge conversation that we're not going to have on this podcast episode. It took me an hour in a recent training with the people in my program to unpack the challenges with setting boundaries, because in my experience, I'd say some people know how to set boundaries effectively, but the bigger problem is getting ourselves to set and maintain boundaries, because there's a lot of fears and challenges that come with it. And people pleasing is one of them. So if you're a people pleaser, I would encourage you to start to notice that and be like, oh yeah, what's this about? And really see what that part of you is needing that's people pleasing. What are you getting out of the people pleasing? And what would it be like to step back from that a little bit more and more, to actually say no when you mean no? I'm going to tell you something. Brene Brown talks about her research saying that the most compassionate people are the most boundary conscious people. And it's true. I had a client this week tell me that even though she doesn't always like my boundaries, she feels safe with me because she knows I will set them. And she knows I'm being compassionate because I'm being honest and I share my heart with her. I can be compassionate because I don't feel resentful about her taking advantage of me, because I take responsibility for whether or not someone gets to take advantage of me, right? I set a boundary and don't allow that. So when you say yes when you mean no, you're actually creating less safety in your relationships, less authenticity in your relationships. And so to be more compassionate and actually more helpful to people, letting people learn their own lessons, do their own work, you can stop the people pleasing and communicate the boundaries you need to communicate so that you can get your own stuff done. That doesn't mean that you never help people, but it means that you start to unpack your own tendencies around this, what it's about. And there's going to be deeper work here, I'm telling you. So maybe grab a journal and write. You're going to notice different parts come up, because this has been a protection mechanism for you for a long time, just as the perfectionism has been, and just as the hyperfunctioning. So as you're shifting these patterns, you may need to go slowly so you can adapt to, how else am I going to meet these protection needs? Because you're not used to putting yourself out there in as authentic of a way with your ADHD brain and all your fabulousness and all of the things that other people see as inconvenient, right? Especially neurotypical folks. Not that neurotypical folks are bad, but if you're in a conversation with other people with ADHD and you're all kind of talking in a circle and people interrupt, but we don't really see it as interrupting, you're just kind of adding to the conversation, and then people share their experience and you share your experience, and we see that as connecting and, oh yeah, I can relate. Yeah. Whereas neurotypical people will see that as you interrupting and you not caring about their stuff because you just only told your own story. Anyone experience that? I know I certainly do and have. And I hear people in conversations talk about how people don't really listen. They don't, they don't listen to other people's stories. I think a lot of people really do listen. Probably there's some people who don't, but I would say for sure, us divergent folks, like we're listening, but we just do conversation differently than a neurotypical person does, right? They may see it as rude or uncaring or inconvenient, but it's just us being us. So if we're going to step into our ADHD-ness and let ourselves be ADHD, we have to be prepared to work with the emotions that might come up if we face rejection or someone doesn't like it. I'm not suggesting that we people please and like just to avoid rejection, but the deeper work here is like figuring out, how do I work with those big feelings? And if you're not sure, I definitely recommend connecting with a therapist, a psychotherapist, because certainly I can't offer that in the podcast. In my program, we do talk a lot about like, how do we work with these big feelings and things like that. And I do have something special coming up soon where we're going to unpack different pieces of working with ADHD. So stay tuned. We might cover some of that. But in the meantime, there's lots of ways you can figure out, how do I work with these big feelings? And if you're not sure, then definitely connect with a therapist in your area. So we went through a lot. I think I got to everything this time. Probably not. There's probably stuff I missed. These are such big topics, right? How do you do a podcast where people still pay attention and you cover everything? I think the answer is you don't. Right? So I would love it if you would comment in the comment section and share your ahas. If you comment, I'd love to give you my 5-step master task plan to help you get stuff done. So go ahead and comment. I'm still trying to figure out how I can automate that. So if I don't with the 5-step master task plan for ADHD, feel free to shoot me an email or DM me. My Instagram is at I_am_Jen_Barnes. It's in the show notes. Or you can email me at jen@pathways2wellnessllc.com to get that guide if you made a comment and I missed it. So not to make extra steps for you, but I'm truly getting to figure out how some of this is. So make sure you comment. Love to hear what comes up for you around this. And this often maybe overlooked group of ADHD women, because we hold our shit together so well that people often don't see us. They don't see our struggle. So I would love to hear your ahas. And if you're not following already, please follow and be sure to share. I'll see you next time. Take care.